Betrayal at the House on the Hill. The first thing you notice when you start playing this is this has a look and feel very much of something like, I don't know, an old Chaosium game or something along that line. Things like Arkham Horror. Yeah, maybe it's a little cleaner, but I was rather surprised to find that this was actually published in 2004 and doesn't seem to have any real direct relationship to that older series of gaming. I looked at the designers. Nah, they're all fairly new designers now. I think it's pretty clear that they probably were folk who played those games and got a kick out of them. And were like, wow, I think we can take these to another level and make things a little bit cleaner than some of those games are, and bake in the stories into these books, so that there's specific scenarios, but you're not playing one, and so that each player doesn't know what's going on. At the very least, they don't know what their enemies' absolute goals are, what they're trying to do, and that's a very, very, very clever idea. I think that's kind of the heart of this. Otherwise, to some extent, this could be Talisman, right? You're wandering around, you're exploring things. You flip up a tile, that's not too complicated. You draw a card based on the tile, and you're affected by it. But the fact that that you don't know who the opponent is, that's kind of minor. They don't know who they are either, so it's not like a werewolf type design where it's like we're trying to figure out who the enemy is and then beat them there. You could have a game that used that kind of system along with this, perhaps, where people know from the very beginning. But I like how this handles it. It's very simple. It's just something triggers the start of the real game. Your goals are the same no matter what in the early stages, and it segments those stages so that you're not faced with this, oh, do I reveal myself now? Is this the time to do it? Or, which can always be kind of a tough decision in those games. I really enjoy it. There's not a whole hell of a lot of heavy thinking in it. There's not a lot of calculation in it, which I really like. One of the problems with some of the more modern games is that instead of there being strategy in the game that's particularly more decisive, what you have is counting and optimization as sort of the keys. Now, those are the things that your Eurogamer loves, right? They love to count and optimize things. I'm not too fond of that kind of stuff. I would rather come up with kind of broad strategies and implement them and have a fair amount of luck in the game, have a bunch of things that can impact my strategy that cause me to maybe either modify it or at least take those things into consideration as I'm devising my strategy. I feel like this does that perfectly fine. Arkham Horror has a fair amount of randomness in it too, so I'm not going to harsh on that about it. It's just kind of painful with how much you have to pay attention in that game, although I like that game as well. Something like Mansions of Madness, there you have a player who's running as the bad guy from the very beginning, which of course is very different, but also filled with luck and also kind of an enjoyable experience where you're getting to figure out how to react and how to cope with the situation as it develops without being a pure luck fest. So, something like Talisman, I don't enjoy at all because whatever strategy there is in that is almost non-existent. And there's not much story, there's not a narrative that's really exciting. There's really nothing going on in a Talisman game. You're moving around and randomly fighting things. And that's really the whole of it. This generates a decent narrative the same way some of the other games that I mentioned do. And I like that a lot. I like the reason I play games is for the story they tell more than anything else, and the story that a game of an abstract game tells is often difficult for me to find and to follow well, and sometimes it's just my own imagination. A game like this, I'm being provided with something that's kind of pleasing. The Euros usually present me with a story that I find unbelievable. In terms of the things that they're representing, there just seems to be too much disconnect between those things and the actual mechanisms of play. Here, the mechanisms of play are well suited and baked into whatever you want to call a thematic layer or anything. And it almost is a thematic layer. This has been rethemed because it's not absolutely based on the idea of exploring a house and the horror of that. There's nothing particularly special about that. It's the exploration and the villain determination and then the secret goals. Those are the things that make this special in whatever way it is. Component-wise, it has a few issues. First of all, tons and tons of chits, which, should that bother me? It does, because there's no easy way to sort them. I get the feeling they're kind of all associated with a given haunt, but there may be some overlap, and there's no real defining mechanism by which to keep them sorted so that you can find things more easily. And in order to discover that sorting mechanism, if it exists, you kind of have to play the game so much that the game probably will stop being fun. That's one thing with it. It does have a limited number of plays, but like things like Tales of the Arabian Night, you're going to have to play the shit out of this game to eat up all of what it has to offer. And at that point, of course, then you're thinking, well, where are the expansions? Yeah, that's a good question. And modern versions, I think, may have some. This version never got any, and so I'm kind of stuck with this for this particular game, which is okay. It's not like I'm in a situation to be playing something as much as I used to play Tales, Yeah, my wife and I kind of play this. I mean, we played four times, I think, or something like that, and that is pretty hefty for us, and we'll probably dig it out again, just as we do with things like Arkham Horror. And I don't see that the number of haunts is ever going to be a terribly limiting factor on my level of play, but it would have been a bit annoying at certain points in my life where games just could take over and become an addiction. I would call, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if this ever would have been that big a problem, except when I had too few games. Back to the components. Yeah. The tiles, we found a misprint on one of the tiles during the last play, one that seems unreasonable. And there's no way to cope with it. You can't fix the tile. I mean, I guess you could make a good scan of what it should be and paste that over very carefully. But there really is no easy fix for that. So as it stands, you have the underground lake in the attic for some reason, or in the second floor, which seems ridiculous, but, it's not that big a deal. It's just a room with effects when you start seeing the game design itself, so you just kind of pass it off. And that's easier than like trying to mark up the counter or trying to figure out, well, what do I do with this when I draw it? One option would be that it gets thrown down in the basement, but it has a card effect on it, which would be weird, and then you maybe redraw a card or something. Or maybe it drops you down to the basement, make some special rules to it. It'll make kind of like the Mystic Elevator, a drop all the way from the first floor, from the top floor to the basement. But again, there's no narrative element to fit that to that counter, to that piece. The cards are fine. There's a limited number. They actually are probably the thing that makes gameplay less repeatable more than anything else, is that there's this limited set of cards, including the omens, which kind of have to be limited, but the other things, And it's going to give a sameness to every game, even though they each have their own scenario goals. How much is that going to bother most people? I don't know, but for me, that actually is probably the thing that will hit me the most, and will make it so that, yeah, that 4 or 5 plays, that's probably enough for a while. You know, I don't need to go back to this because there just aren't that many nifty things I can find in the game. Probably my biggest gripe is a simple little mechanical one, which is these little sliders here. They don't move very nicely. They're not a good way to track the information. And not moving nicely is a big deal when I'm doing it on the camera. But the bigger thing is, it's hard to represent what number they're at, or to see what number they're actually pointing to. I was groping for a bigger word, and, you know, trying to sound classy or something. Whatever the hell it is that I do. I'm often finding myself doing that, and it's kind of embarrassing in a way. It's like, why don't you just speak with the easy words? Well, because when you're writing, there's certain flows, and you want the perfect word that sounds great and everything. And somehow, it seems like those same concerns should come into play when I'm speaking. I always have this, anyway, we're getting so far off topic, but I always have this desire to not really sound better than I am, perhaps, maybe, I don't know, but to say things in a very, very perfect way. More, and it's the same with my dancing, it's the same with a lot of things with my personal interactions, to be a paragon of some sort or another, and I'm not capable of doing that. Certainly not in this case. But I feel like I'm not far from being able to reach for those perfect words. If I could just have a few more seconds. And I'll throw in an and sound like an idiot trying to reach for that. And sometimes just have nothing at all. Anyhow, about this. It's a fun game. It delivers what you would want it to, which is that kind of, it doesn't give you a suspense as to, oh, I wonder who the bad guy is, you know, and I'm trying to figure that out from the clues that are available or anything like that. No, it's, you stumble into that position. But in terms of the strategy of the play itself, you're trying to improve your own character position as best as you can, and therefore, no matter which side you end up on, you improve your chances of winning that way. It's not something that you're going to play with an intensely competitive air to it. For one thing, you know, assuming you're playing by a reasonable number, at least 3 players, well, some of the players are co-oping it against the other player, and they win or lose together, whether or not they die. They need to work together, hand each other items, stuff like that, in order to make it easier. I heard complaints about the rules. All right, let's pull them out. A lot of people complain about the rules, which I found not tremendously easy to discern from, but no worse than an Games Workshop type stuff that I figured this came from, or no worse than your modern Euro or AT game. It's glossy, it's filled with pictures and everything. It may be hard to find elements that you need to know, but nothing terribly wrong with them. Some of the haunts have issues. So far, the only issue that I've run into that was kind of painful was one where the good guys and bad guys essentially contained special rules that directly contradicted each other. But any level of reasoning about the situation once it arose made it very, very clear which way it had to be interpreted. It's a shame that it's interpreted the way that it is, that it's written the way that it is. A couple of extra words like this supersedes the trader's special rules on this or something like that. That would have made it a little clearer. But yeah, basically it was a matter of things that I don't even remember what it was. Oh, stats couldn't ever go down, but the only way of stopping the trader was to reduce his stats. And there was one thing in the game which claimed it would reduce the trader player's stats, and the trader player's the trader player's entry said in his book that his stats will never go down. Obvious contradiction, obvious solution. There's only one way this game actually works. You can find that, and it's an easy path. Maybe there's others. I assume there's others. There may be ones, though, that are harder to resolve than that. I haven't seen one yet, and like I said, we've done a little sample of the plays. Not run into anything that was game-breaking. Just something that was, they fucked that one up, right? Definitely one I'm glad I picked up. I had been interested when I first saw and heard word of it. This and A Touch of Evil were the two that kind of caught my eye. The other one maybe more than this in terms of, I want to take a look at these two. They look like they have something interesting to them. I don't even remember. I wouldn't have picked this up except that I saw it used at the flea market because it's kind of fallen off the radar a little bit. My wife and I have piles and piles of things to do that I think she'd enjoy, so I'm not really hunting after this. We hardly ever play anymore. So, anyway, but this recently we did a few because I picked up some things. This definitely filled a niche for me, and I think it's a pretty damn good game. It does do something that I haven't seen any other exploration horror games really accomplish with that. You have these secret objectives that are fairly detailed and a bunch of different scenarios without, walking in and kind of knowing ahead of time what you're facing. So that's kind of cool. And it does that on a framework where you're doing the blunder around and explore stuff, which I always find to some degree fun. I even find that fun in Talisman, even though the whole game ends up being kind of a bore for me. Let's send this up.